to do is really change our focus. And our focus is going away from a one-size-fits-all wine guru telling you, have this with this. We're saying it's a matter of personal taste. So our focus is going to change to personal preferences. And if you can understand personal preferences, you will make successful food and wine pairings. So I can see some of you looking at me. This is going to be interesting. It is. And you're going to find out things about yourself today. So what I aim to do is to give you an insight into our new approach. Sorry, I have to keep keeping here a bit static, and I'm a bit of a wanderer when it comes to talking. So we have 3 basic principles that we now use for our food and wine pairing. First of all, we're all different. Agreed? We're all different. And personal preferences do matter. So we're going to look at personal preferences. That's one of the first things. They really do matter. Food is the culprit. For too long, wine has been the guilty partner when we do food and wine pairing. We say, it's the wine that's made this taste strange. It's the wine that's done this. It is not. It's components in the food that are going to alter your taste of the wine, your perception of the wine. So understanding what it is in the food that changes in the wine, then you've got a greater choice of options. You're not just fixating on having always Sauterne with foie gras or having muscadet with oysters. It widens the choice of options that you can give. And thirdly, and this is a really important thing to get across, is that most wine tastes relatively okay with most foods. It is not going to turn into dishwater, right? Into filth. It might change, but it might change in such a way that it's still palatable. It's just not quite so nice as it was before. And a lot of consumers are frightened to take the risk because they feel they'll spend money on wine and it will become undrinkable. It probably have been undrinkable to them before they put it with the food because it wasn't matching their personal preferences. So there are few occasions where you're going to have a wine with a food that it tastes like orange juice when you've cleaned your teeth. And I think most of us have had that experience when orange juice no longer tastes like orange juice because we've just cleaned our teeth, right? That's going to be a rare occurrence. So it's giving confidence to explore the world of wine with food. So these are going to be my focus, and the first part we're going to talk about is really talking about how we taste. And when I'm talking about taste, I'm talking about the sense of taste, the 5 primary flavours that we can taste. So we can taste sweet, and that's quite easy. We know sweet, that tastes like sugar. So we can isolate sweetness by having sugar. Salt we can taste, and we can isolate salt quite easily just by having some salt. Sour is acidity, and again, we all recognise acidity. Now the next one, the 4th one, is savouriness, or umami. Now umami is something that has been recognised for a long time in Eastern cultures, but it's always been there. We've always been able to taste it. It's just that we didn't put a word to it. Well, we did, because we'd say that's something savoury. And it's linked to protein and to the breakdown of amino acids, and glutamate in particular is one of the chemicals that gives you that savoury taste. If you want to try and see if you can recognise the savoury taste, in the cake cup, the dark cake cup, the brown cake cup, we have what I can say is the nearest I can get to isolating umami taste, and that is monosodium glutamate. Now, the monosodium is going to have a salty taste. It is the glutamate that's going to give you that savoury flavour. So you've got a plate, and that plate is to be shared between the 3 of you on your table. So if one of you wants to take the plate forward, pick up the cupcake, the dark one, and take a pinch of that powder, that glutamate powder. Right, so you pop that on your tongue. Let's see how we taste. Right, first of all, saltiness. Is that what you're perceiving? You're perceiving a saltiness, almost a soapy soda kind of taste for some people. Then you wait. Then you wait. And then you wait. And what's that flavour now? Or sorry, the taste that you are getting on your tongue now? Is that a savouriness? Yes. That's the flavour of glutamate, the flavour of protein. Umami can be translated to deliciousness, or even better, yumminess. And for a lot of us, that is a yummy taste. We're drawn to it. Finally, taste number 5 is bitter, right? Is bitterness. So those are the 5 primary flavours that we can isolate, or taste that we can isolate and recognise. So, what does that mean? Well, I said to you, we're all different, and taste is how you perceive those tastes through your taste receptors. And taste receptors are taste buds. And the more taste buds you have, the more intense those flavours are. The less taste buds you have, you actually need to have more flavour in your food to actually recognise it. So there's going to be people, groups of people, who genetically will have more taste buds or less taste buds. We will have different tolerance level to each of these tastes, and that is going to be genetics. It's all to do with our genetic makeup. The way we taste can be divided into 2 things. It's either nature, what we are, or it's nurture, what we learn to like. So we will have our own background, our own profile in the way we taste, but we can also learn to go outside of those taste preferences because we become accustomed to things. So if we think about how you can nurture your taste for something, and I'm sure if you're in the wine business, you can remember your first wine and where you are now in your wine preferences, which may have changed an awful lot. But let's think about this. If you're in a family, right, in a family that drinks tea, the family has a brew of tea, that's the beverage that you have. When you're a child, you would probably be given that tea with lots of milk in, quite dilute, and maybe some sugar to take the edge off it. As you grow up, you want to move away from those things that link you to being a child. You want to seem more grown up. You want to have the same things as the grown up. So you start having less sugar maybe in your tea, maybe having a little less milk in there until you're drinking the same as maybe your older siblings or your parents. And you've built up a tolerance to something you would have been programmed to dislike as a child. Usually in tea, the bitterness. Maybe the same when you first had coffee. And the same with wine. There's wines, you imagine the first time you had a dry sherry? I know my experience. I thought it was hideous. I absolutely love it now. So I've built up that liking. And this applies to wine as well. So we change from what we would prefer naturally to what we feel we should like because we want to be part of a group and seem to be maybe more sophisticated as well in the process. So in terms of evolution, we are drawn to certain things. In order to survive, we need to be drawn to things that give us energy. And the things that give us energy are sugar. So we're drawn to sugar. Protein gives us energy. So we're drawn to things that are savoury, for those umami flavours. We are naturally drawn to those and have a preference for them. We will have things that will be like warnings to us. And if you think about most unpleasant flavours that we have, experiences, bitterness is an element of that. Bitterness is what can make things seem unpleasant. And again, in terms of evolution, that is to avoid us eating poisonous things. If you didn't eat poisonous things because they were yucky, you carried on, you were able to reproduce. If you kept eating the poisonous things, you probably died and you didn't reproduce. Now, the terms of bitterness, this is where you can really, really show how different we are, our different preferences in terms of the way we taste and what we would prefer. So I'm going to get you to do a test now. And this test is about your tolerance level of bitterness. Because most of the time, that's what we're avoiding when we're doing food and wine pairing. We want to avoid those unpleasant interactions linked to bitterness. And we are different. There is going to be people in this room who do not have the receptor for bitterness. There's going to be some of us in the room who will just taste some bitterness, but it's never really too unpleasant. There's some of us who will be dancing around going, why did you make me do that? That is hideous. And we're all tasting the same thing. So in front of you, you've got a small questionnaire which says taste tolerance test. So it's this piece of paper just here. And on that piece of paper, because I want to do a little bit of research, I've got 75 people here in the room, and I want to see what happens. So there's a couple of questions I'd like you to answer. So if you could answer those for me, and we will collect these sheets. If you just leave them on the table at the end, we will collect those in. So if you could just fill in those two questions as it relates to you. What preference do you have in terms of coffee, even if you don't drink coffee? If you can answer that. And the second one is, what is your preferred style of wine? So imagine when you walk out of here tonight, you can only ever have one bottle of wine for the rest of your life. So you have to choose one bottle of wine. What would that be? Right, once you've done that, can I ask you just to swirl your mouth with a little bit of water, because some of you are going to still be tasting that umami, right? It hasn't gone away yet. So if we can just swirl that out your mouth. And what you will find attached to the questionnaire is a strip of paper. And that strip of paper is used in scientific experiments to check on your genetic ability to taste bitterness. So there's a chemical in there which is called PTC, which is a bitter chemical, which you would find in things like cabbage, green leaf vegetables, rapeseed. So it's a bitterness. So what I'd like you to do is to take that and pop it in the center of your tongue and close your mouth. And as soon as you start, I can see somebody's ready to do the dance. Take it out your mouth. As soon as you start to taste some bitterness, take it out your mouth. This is all the same chemical, same concentrations. Right, some of you haven't taken that paper out your mouth yet. So, you're not tasting bitterness. What have you learned today? Is genetically, you do not have the receptor to take the message to your brain that something is bitter. Which means that something that might taste perfectly all right to you when you pair a food and wine might be the most hideous thing someone else has tasted. That's why one size fits all doesn't work. So let's see what has happened in the room and how that really is going to affect choices and maybe recommendations. So you've got some coloured paper on the table. If you couldn't taste anything, could you please raise the green piece of paper? If you could. Right up. Right. So we're definitely not all the same. So you couldn't taste anything. So what does that mean? This is to do with your tolerance levels for bitterness. So what does that mean to you? Well, when you are a tolerant taster, it generally means that you would have a preference for strong flavoured food and drink. So you want concentration in your food. Now, you're not a prisoner to your genetics, right? You can learn to appreciate others. So some of you will go, no, I don't like that. But actually, you probably do, but you like other things as well because you've learned to like them as well. You can't go around to customers saying, suck on that piece of paper now and then I'll give you a wine recommendation. So maybe asking them a question to try and find out what their preference is will help you. So quite often people who have a high tolerance, or are unable to taste bitterness will like strong coffee, strong maybe espresso, concentrated coffee. So that would be their first preference. They need that in order to taste it, and they don't get the bitterness that other people might get. So it's a good one. The green light is go. You are the lucky ones, because most food and wine pairings are going to work for you because you're not going to get the negative interactions, right? You're not going to get that. So lots of things are going to be fine for you. The only problem is going to be if you have an interaction which makes the wine taste less concentrated, a little bit thinner. But most of the time, most wines are really going to work for you. So you're the easy customer. You're the easy one, right? So, which of you tasted some bitterness, but it wasn't too bad? Yeah, a few of you? Yes? Yeah, the yellow, put the yellow up. Amber, right? A bit of amber. So more of you are going to be in the next group. And that next group is that you are sensitive to bitterness, but generally you can manage it. It's not too bad. So you are sensitive. The problem here for you is that if you in your comfort zone at the moment and you have a food and wine interaction that takes that wine out of your comfort zone, then that might be a negative thing for you. So you need to approach wine and food pairing with some caution when those interactions mean that the wine will seem more bitter for you because you are sensitive to that. So people who are sensitive tasters tend to have more taste buds than those who are tolerant tasters. That means that you still want some intensity, some interesting flavours there. You still need that, but you are sensitive to that bitterness. And quite often, when it comes to maybe your coffee, you want to have something that takes a little bit of the edge of that bitterness off. That might be that you put a bit of sugar in your espresso coffee, or you might want a little line of milk in your espresso coffee just to take off some of the bitterness, to balance out that bitterness that you are perceiving. Who felt that this was really unbearable? Right. You are very sensitive, dears. Right. So you are the ones who really think of that as being the red light. You really need to be cautious about those interactions that you have between food and wine where that bitterness is increased. If I give you an example, if I had a 5-point scale, and on that 5-point scale, I had wines that I rated in their bitterness, and I gave you a wine that had a 2 in its bitterness rating. Right. Now, most people here are going to find that's relatively acceptable, that 2. We match it with some food which increases that bitterness to a 4. The people who are tolerant tasters will still think it's fine. They can manage it. They don't actually notice it that much. Those people who are sensitive tasters maybe find it a little bit more bitter, but it's not going to be too bad. The sensitive tasters will find it unpalatable. They will find it, because to them, it's not gone to a 4, it's gone to a 5, right? Because they are more sensitive to that bitterness. Right, so that's what happens with our genetics. Nurture is going to mean that you can accustom yourself to some of these to make things more bearable. But the other thing we want to know is what happens when we put food together with wines and how those change. So the second part is understanding what components in the food are going to do to the wine. So in your food, you've got salt, acid, sweet, and umami. There's some other things there like the chili heat, the chemothesis, the burn of chili, fat in there, and things, the intensity of the flavours in the food. I've colour-coded these because there are components in food that are wine-friendly. They do good things to wine. There are components in food that are wine enemies and need to be avoided if you don't want negative interactions. And the first one here is salt. Salt is the friend of wine. Salt is a friend of wine. Now that might seem a little bit different to what you've thought of before. Now I'll prove it to you. I will prove it. But quite often when we were saying have a tannic red wine with a steak and it seems softer because of the protein in the steak, no. It was the salt that you sprinkled on top of the grilled steak that made the tannins soften. Because salt makes things less bitter, astringent, it makes them less acidic, and it makes them feel smoother and richer in the mouth. It is salt that does that. So it's a friend to tannic wines. It can make wines that seem a bit unpalatable when you have them by themselves become more palatable when you have them with food because of the salt that's in that food. Think about when you're cooking something, why do you add salt? Is it for the salt flavour or because the ability of salt to bring out the flavours in the food? That's what we're doing. Acid as well. Acid will make a wine seem less acidic. So if you've got acid in your food, it will make your wine less acidic. But that acid will bring out the fruitiness, almost making the wine seem sweeter, more approachable, riper maybe. And that's what your acid in your food can do. As a caution though, you really need to make sure that your food acid doesn't overwhelm the acid in the wine. So you always want to make sure that your wine has a little bit more acid or has the same amount of acid as your food. And with salt and acid, our perception of them will change once they get to levels that maybe we will perceive as dangerous. So things become too salty, become unpleasant. Things too acid become unpleasant. And that again is to do with genetics. We are programmed to do that. Next one is sweetness. And sweetness is the real enemy of wine. Any sweetness in food will make your wine seem drier, more bitter, astringent, less fruity, more thin, and acid. Not what we really want to happen. We don't want to happen in extreme, but most of the time, a little bit isn't going to be too bad. It will just make the wine seem slightly out of balance. But sweetness can really put fine wines really out of balance, all wines out of balance. Now, what I want to do is just stop here and give you something to convince you that what I'm saying is true. So, what I'd like you to do is just we're going to taste these wines about 3 times. So just take a little sip of the first white wine and we'll get a picture of it, what style of wine it is. No need to sniff, no need to use your SAT. I just want you to get a picture of this wine. It is dry, it's acidic, it's quite simple, fruity, wine. No oak, nothing else. It's a simple, neutral, fruity, white wine, right, with high levels of acidity. Let's taste wine number 2. Simple, Fruity. Low levels of tannin, but some of you are picking something up there, right? But very simple, red wine. Not really complex, not setting the world on fire. These are the wines that most people actually like to drink. Nothing too challenging in, yes? Most consumers like wines that taste of very little, right? So let's see what happens to these wines when we taste something sweet and then taste the wine. So on your plate, you've got some little biscuits, some sweet biscuits. I think they're about the limit of sweetness that I could get. So if you want to take one of those each, have a little nibble, get that sweetness around your mouth. And pick up wine number one and taste wine number one. So, is it drier? For those of you who can taste bitter, does it seem a little bit bitter now? And a bit more drying out, astringent in the mouth. Certainly less fruity. There wasn't much fruit there. We've managed to strip it out. And what we're left with is a thin, acidic wine. That's what sugar has done to it. So let's do the same for the red wine. Let's see what happens, because we've got another component in there, which is tannins, which we have in red wines. Let's taste the sweet biscuit and then the red wine. Right, has the wine gone out of balance? What we've done, that sweetness in the food has taken those wines out of balance in some way. What has happened here, those tannins have become more green and astringent and dry, right? If you taste bitterness, you're probably finding this even more unpleasant, right? We've lost some of the fruit and the acid seems thin and sharp, right, this time, rather than being refreshing, all because of some sweetness. And so often we will have sweet components in foods that we would consider to be savoury. So that can be the enemy. So you can see how that dries it out. Now what we can do is use the food's friends to actually bring these wines into balance. So what I'm going to do, you've got that first, you've got that picture still in your head and on your palate of that wine we just tasted, that red wine. What we want to do is to bring it back into balance. And what we need to do with that is to make those tannins seem softer and smoother. And we'll do that by using some salt. So in the other cupcake on your plate, you've got some molten salt. So you're not going to get any problems with this. Just take a bit of the salt and crunch on it and get the salty flavour in your mouth. Now try wine number 2 again. Same wine, different taste. Can you see how those tannins now are softer and smoother? But there's still something missing. Actually, we need to bring the fruitiness back. So, acid will bring out the fruit flavours. So, don't shudder now and don't have a flashback to your tequila moments, right? Take some of the lemon. Just squeeze a little bit of the lemon on the back of your hand. Just lick it, get it around your mouth, and have a little taste of wine number 2 again. Does it taste fruitier? Right? So fruitier, and the things that we've had in our mouth, we've had the saltiness, we've had the acidity, has made this wine quite a charming wine now. Right? So this is your inexpensive $4.99 Valpolicella that by having some salt there, by having some acidity there, it has actually become a very palatable, enjoyable drink, which is why it's so popular with spaghetti bolognese. Acidity-free from the tomatoes, the saltiness that comes from the Parmesan cheese. Cheers. Are you convinced? Good. Right. So let's do one more thing. The white wine. Do you think we need to put salt in that to actually bring out the fruitiness? No tannins, not making it bitter, right? We haven't got that. We haven't got those there. All we need to do to actually boost that fruitiness in that wine, which is a neutral white wine, is to use lemon juice. So again, take a little bit of the lemon juice. And when you taste your wine number one, fruitier, a little bit sweeter on your perception. The sugar hasn't increased, but you perceive it now as being a sweeter, fruitier flavour. Neutral white wines are safe food wines. If you've got sensitive tasters or very sensitive tasters in a mixed group, you know that your tolerant taster is going to like it. They're going to drink it and find little change. Those that will find a change and lose that fruitiness will actually be the ones that you need to focus on giving these more neutral styles of wine where you're not going to get quite so many negative actions. Condiments on tables, well, we have salt on the table. We can add it. We have acidity quite often. In many, many cultures, you will find that acid and salt-rich condiments are there on the table so that you can bring your food into balance for your personal preference. Not anything to do with matching it with wine, but to bring your food into personal preference parameters. And that's what we're doing here. Right, so those are the things, the food friendly. Umami is a difficult one. Umami by itself, or very powerful savoury foods, made maybe ripe cheeses, things like that, can give you the same effect that you have from sweetness. But it's very, very unusual that umami is by itself. Usually, it's got high salt content because those flavours develop through preservation, and one of the things you use in preservation is salt. So you will have something like a biricot ham, which is full of umami, full of glutamate, but it's gone through a salting process and a drying process which concentrates that salt, the same as with many mature hard cheeses. So that natural component that's there is going to be balancing that umami out. But be aware, if you've got really, really rich umami dishes, that if you're having a red wine, you really want to go for something with softer tannins, maybe a mature wine. So when we were saying when you have game, rich in umami, have a mature wine. Not because it's got mushroomy flavours that match, it's because the game, the umami in the game, isn't going to affect the tannin so much because they're softened and lower. Right, so next experiment. Let's move on to the amber. These are things that really are a matter of what you like, whether you like it or not. Chili, or the heat that you get from chili, which is the chemothesis, the burn that you get from chili, is something some of us will really like and some of us will want to avoid. And the thing with pairing wine with hot food, quite often you say you can't do it. Well, you can. What you have to be aware of is that chili can do exactly the same as sweet things. It will make a wine seem drier. It will make it seem less fruity. But what it will do is the alcohol will make the heat in the food turn up. So if you want to have a spicy dish, and that's at your limit in terms of the heat, if you don't want to turn the heat up, keep the alcohol levels low. If you like an extra blast of heat, then have higher alcohol wines because you'll get another blast of that chili heat. Again, let's see if it works. You might get hooked on these chili biscuits, be warned, right? So on your plate, you've got some other biscuits to try. Those are chili crackers. And if you want to take a nibble on those, engage the heat. If you've got a glass with some wine left in, taste it now with that chili. Some of you are getting more pepperiness, more heat, more burn, like you've got another blast coming through, right? So some of you might like it. Some of you might want to keep it at the level of your tolerance. So if you have someone who's having a spicy dish, make sure you know what level of heat is their tolerance. If they've got a low tolerance, they want it to stay the same, we go for the classic match, don't we? A sweeter wine, because that sweetness will come down. A fruitier wine, because we know that chili is going to lower the level of fruitiness, so we want it still to be there so they can taste it. And the lower levels of alcohol, which won't increase the chili. If you want to beef it up, have a lovely Shiraz at 15% or a Zinfandel, and you'll get that extra blast of the chili. Some of you still suffering? Right. So next, the other things here. Well, fat and oiliness coats your mouth, and that fatty oiliness is going to stop you receiving some of those messages, mostly pain messages, about the level of the acidity. So when the acidity is in your mouth in a high acid wine, it will seem less acidic. So for some people who don't like high acid, when you pair it with a fatty food, that wine will become delicious because that acid is in their levels of tolerance, right? So quite often we will say, oh, this is great. Chablis is great with food. A, it's white, got no tannins, so there's not going to be bad interactions. It's high in acidity, which seems to be smoother when you have it with any food that's got any oiliness in there. So you can see why those classic matches work and understand why. And then finally, highly flavoured foods. Now, again, it's about personal preference and what you want the wine to do. Quite often, you would want to match a highly flavoured food with a highly flavoured wine, so that you've not got one overwhelming the other. But maybe you want that wine to cut through, be refreshing, and you're not really worried about the flavour, then maybe you're not going to. So say you had a really spicy dish, it's going to be difficult to match that with a wine with enough flavour. Maybe it's the fact that you have a wine that's refreshing and quenches your thirst would be better to have with that. So it's a matter of personal preference. So these are the things, the components in the food and the basic tastes and how they work together. And understanding that will mean there's countless opportunities to match or pair food and wine, not just to keep repeating something that we've been told through history works. If it works because it's high acid, right, and neutral, there is a plethora of choices that you can give. If it works because it's a wine that has moderate levels of tannins, right, then it will work if you've got other wines with similar kind of profiles. So how can you put this into practice? Well, first of all, you need to establish what the guest's preferences are. So, what is their preferred style of wine? That's an easy enough question. A good sommelier, a good person in a wine shop selling, retailer, wants to make sure the customer has what they like, what they want. Now, if you find that they have a preference for a certain thing, and then they're going to pair it with a food that will change it, maybe you would recommend a wine that stays within the style that they like. It may not be the wine that they currently drink. It may be a wine that might have more sweetness than they usually have. It may be a wine that may be a mature wine that they wouldn't usually drink. But as long as it keeps within the profile of the wines that they prefer, this will give them confidence. Confidence in you, confidence to try new things and explore new things. And then what you're doing the nurturing bit, That's our role. Our role is to nurture people to try new things, feel safe, feel confident, and feel that we're doing the job to help them. So that's the end of my talk, and I hope you've gained something, that you've learned something about yourself, maybe something about how things interact, and maybe how you would apply some of these principles in your workplace or in education in the future. But really, it's up to you what you like.